Every Christian knows the Gospels were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's completely wrong.
This video offers an important lesson. It's spoken with confidence, it sounds compelling, but it's completely false. And sadly, many people aren't going to take the time to closely examine its claims. That's why Proverbs 18:17 warns us, the first to state his case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him. In other words, just because someone sounds persuasive doesn't mean they are. So let's take a closer look at some of this creator's claims and see if it holds up under cross-examination.
The four Gospels were written between 70 and 100 CE by anonymous authors. We know this because the earliest manuscripts don't include any names, no titles, no gospel according to, just a story starting mid-scene with no author attached.
That's a pretty confident claim. It sounds so matter-of-fact, but it's not true. In his paper, The Titles of the Gospels in the Early New Testament Manuscripts, scholar Simon Gathercole shows that the earliest Greek manuscripts do include titles, what are called superscriptions, that attribute the Gospels to either Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. When asked about the titles during a lecture, Gathercole says,
"Yeah, I don't think that they are attached later, because all the earliest manuscript evidence that we have, where we have an end or a beginning of a gospel, has the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John."
Scholar Brant Pitre put it even more forcefully. He says there's absolutely no manuscript evidence to support the claim that originally the Gospels had no titles. But don't take my word for it, see for yourself. Here's P75, one of the earliest substantial manuscripts of Luke and John, dated late 2nd or early 3rd century. And what do we see? At the end of Luke and the beginning of John, we have the titles, the Gospel according to Luke and the Gospel according to John. Here's P4, again, late 2nd or early 3rd century. It contains the Gospel according to Matthew. Maybe he's thinking of P66, one of the oldest copies of John's Gospel, around 200 AD. Nope. There's another title. So when this content creator confidently claims that the earliest manuscripts have no titles, we have to ask, what early manuscripts is he referring to?
So where do the names come from? In the 2nd century, as different Christian groups were battling over which stories about Jesus were legit, church leaders needed to draw lines, which Gospels had authority and which did not. Their solution? Attach big names to the anonymous text they wanted to promote.
Here we're given another claim without evidence to try to make sense of a former claim that had no evidence. But let's imagine, for the sake of the argument, the Gospels were originally anonymous, but later on Christians conspired to deceive the masses and falsely attribute them to give them more authority. Okay. Why choose Mark and Luke? You've got 11 actual disciples to choose from. If you're making stuff up, why not choose Peter or Philip or Thomas or even Jesus himself? If you're inventing names, you don't settle for Peter's interpreter or Paul's traveling companion. You choose big names that carry authority. Interestingly, that's exactly what the apocryphal Gospels do, like the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary. They attach the big famous names to give credibility. So ironically, names like Mark and Luke point towards authenticity, not against it.
Matthew and John, two of Jesus' apostles. Mark, supposedly Peter's interpreter. Luke, Paul's travel companion. It was genius-level religious branding, but the evidence doesn't back it up.
Actually, the evidence overwhelmingly does back it up. That's why the early church fathers were unanimous in attributing the four Gospels to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and no one else. Think about why this matters. If the Gospels started out anonymous and then were copied and circulated and recopied and copied again and circulated for decades around the Roman Empire, from Judea to Rome to Egypt to France, then here's the question. How did the scribes and early church fathers conspire to unanimously attribute all the Gospels to the exact same four names? No confusion, no disagreement, no debate. That's not how anonymous documents work. We know this because we have the book of Hebrews, which is genuinely anonymous. Notice how there's a lot of debate and disagreement over its authorship. Was it Paul or Barnabas or Luke or Clement or someone else? We just don't know. So if the Gospels were truly anonymous, we should see this kind of debate early on, but we don't. Incredibly, we see uniform and unanimous agreement.
Take Matthew. The author writes in polished Greek, copies most of Mark, and clearly doesn't know Judean geography. Would the actual disciple need to plagiarize someone else's account?
All right, a couple things. First, Matthew's previous profession was a tax collector, making it very likely that he could read and write in Greek, the primary language of commerce at the time. Second, if the Gospel of Mark was directly based on the testimony of the Apostle Peter, who was both a leader of the 12 and an eyewitness to more of Jesus' ministry than Matthew, then there's nothing unreasonable about Matthew using Mark as a reliable source. All right. His video goes on to raise some other points, but rather than continue a point-by-point refutation and turning this into a longer response, I just want to encourage you to watch his video and then go read Brant Pitre's book, The Case for Jesus. If you want to thoughtfully engage challenges, you can't just watch videos on social media. You need to challenge yourself to think more deeply about these ideas. And this book is a good place to start. Class dismissed.